Good afternoon, everyone out there on the interwebs. My name is Jared, and this is my channel, Mazda B3K. Today's project is going to be a complete rear suspension swap of my 2010 Ford Fusion Jadzia. Without further ado, let's get started. So the front's been renewed on Jadzia, but not the back. So we're going to go ahead and take care of that now. We have the parts. Specifically, what we're going to be doing today is upper control arm, lower control arm, and shocks. That's what we're going to be working on today. So first things first, you're going to want to lift it in the air, both sides, put in jack stands to free up your jack, because we're going to need the jack to compress a control arm to get things lined up. And also, along the way, we are going to have to take a couple of measurements to make sure that we maintain preload on a couple of parts. Alright, so first thing after we get jacked up, give it a shimmy shake. Make sure what you've done is stable. We're good. So we're going to take these off. These are 19 millimeter, and I strongly suggest having an impact driver, and this is why. Alright, so first thing we're going to do is we need to pull the, pull the lower shock bolt. Shock's here, the bolt's here, has a captive retainer on the other side, so we're just going to go at it. If you don't have one, I recommend you grab a swivel. These can really save the day. And get yourself stuck. So, yeah, put this back on it and actually get out. There we go. Alright, so at this point, we're probably going to need to get the jack and put it right here because it's trying to dip down. So we'll go ahead and do that. Jack. Otherwise, it's going to fight us and cause all sorts of mischief.
We're going to support the lower control arm to take some pressure off of the shock bolt.
There. That's probably about right. Yeah. So now that we have the pressure off, we can finish threading this out by hand very easily. And it is a very long bolt. There we go. Bolt's out. Moving on. Alright, so next step. We're going to pull this bolt which connects the lower control arm, the upper control arm, right here. It's a 15 millimeter. Get on it. And it's going to get a little stuck. Again, we can put a little more lift on our jack. But as you can see, it is a bit stuck. So what we're probably going to have to do is run a short extension through here, finish tapping it out, because I don't believe I'll be able to wiggle it out. So let me work on that and I'll bring you back.
It's moving.
Yeah, I wish I had something longer though.
It's not moving.
I need something longer. Okay. Alright, pay attention to this upper control arm. You need to measure this, because when you put everything back together, this is where the arm needs to be sitting when you do. Use your new one. So what I'll do before I take the other side of this loose is I will make a measurement from the ground up and just get a rough idea of where this needs to be before I pull the other end. But for now, we got to figure out how to get the rest of this off. And I think our next target is going to be over here, where we have, I guess that's the lower control arm connections and knuckle. Alright, so cameraman made a good suggestion, which is why don't you just measure against the top of the fender liner. And when you measure it that way, it's about 15 inches exactly. So 15 inches. 18.
A shock bolt is an 18 for those of you in internet land. 18 millimeter.
Yeah. Alright, so what we filmed a moment ago, that actually was this end link coming out where I got stuck with the driver over here. The shock bolt is a little bit further down. Go hand me the camera. It is a little further down right there. And it is an 18 millimeter, so we're going to get on that and go ahead and rip it out so we can wiggle the shock around. That'll help us with the next bolt. Yep.
What was that fell from the top?
Alright, so we got the bolt out. It did not have a captive end on it. Actually it did. That's what fell. Right here. Captive end. Put that back on. Bolt overall looks pretty good. A little bit of schmutz in it. Not bad. Alright, so that's out of the way. And now the bottom of the shock. We should be able to knock it loose and then wiggle it around. Right now it's kind of snug in the bottom of the knuckle, but I'll probably beat on it a little bit because it's being replaced. And it just laughs at me. So, yeah, that's not wanting to move at all. Awesome.
Put the lift under the bucket of the lower control arm.
Let's see what this does. Oh yeah, it's stuck in there pretty good. That is impressive. Alright. Oh, that broke it loose, I think.
Yeah, it looked like it.
Yeah, it did. Okay. It's loose. Very good.
Remember, the weight of the car is always more powerful than your arms.
Okay, so it's hard to see this bolt, but we need to loosen up the bolt that is at the top of the shock tower right here. There's 3 of them. This one actually goes through the upper control arm as well. So we need to get it moving. And my solution is a 15 millimeter wrench and Thor. That's how we're going to make this move. wish this was a 12 point. Well, it's starting to move, so I'm going to try switching to my flexible ratcheting wrench, because I can sneak it right in here and it's still extremely tight. It's just bouncing. So this would be a case where it'd be really nice if I could use a breaker bar to get this thing moving, but I can't. And I can't get the shock quite far enough forward to do what I need to do. So, let's try one other thing. So I wanted to show you this on film to show that even though I do this a lot, I don't have all the answers initially. And sometimes you just gotta mix and match tools and strategies until you come up with something that works. So these are the swivels. But the problem here is, again, there's just not enough real estate no matter how I try to move it.
Let me see if I can move that shock.
Hey guys, this is ultimately what we did to solve it. So my brother got this compressed and sitting up here so we had more room. And then we took the 15 swivel we have, put it on the big ratchet here, and I was able to lean in and get enough strength to bear to get this loose. So it is now loose, and we're just going to keep working on backing it out. Guys, let me show you why we are doing this. So this is the old upper control arm. And if you take a look at the bushing, or lack thereof, that's supposed to be the rubber that goes around the metal there. And it's gone. It's holier than the Pope. So, give you a comparison, that's what a new one's going to look like. And that's why we're doing this. This vehicle's 13 years old, and it is time. Okay. We got that out of the way. We got to get the shock free. To do that, there are 3 bolts. 2 of them are right there. 1 and 2. And then number 3 is right there. Don't confuse them with the guy in the back. We're looking at the one that's in the angle iron channel right there. So these 3 need to come out. I'm pretty sure they're 15s. See if we can't get at them with some power tools. And then once that bracket is loose, we just kind of wiggle it out, and then we get the bracket and the shock out together, and then we'll have to separate the shock from the bracket. Okay guys, so that's where the bracket was. I got it out. So here it is. Now, it's important that we mark the angle at which the shock was bolted into its hat here, because if it is way far off, you're not going to be able to swing the shock back into position with the rest of the knuckle. So one thing I'm seeing here is that when the shock is laying flat on the ground, only one point wants to contact over here, right where my finger is. So we'll use that as our standard. We only have one point there wants to touch. And as far as getting the bolts out, they are 14 millimeter, not 15s. They're 14s. And 2 of them you can get with an extension and a swivel. And the 3rd one, you can also at least get it broken loose. But at least with my tool, this heat shield over the exhaust was getting in the way. I had to really shove it to break it free. But next step is, once we have our mark for the shock, is we go ahead and take the bolt out and we put the new one in. Alright, and that's it. It is out. So here's our bolt. It's a 15 on this side. The nut is an 18. So all I did is just take an 18 wrench, put it on one side, use my impact on the other. Came right apart. So since the Bilsteins already come fully extended and are not compressed. You don't have to cycle them or anything to get them ready. You can just go ahead and put it in. This is the top.
I laid it out like it should go in.
So, just gonna lay this in. And remember, we got to get roughly in the position we need to be in, which is going to be something like this. And then we're going to feed our bolt back through and then tighten it up. And then we can reinstall the assembly if this is where we were stopping. But we're doing a full rear suspension swap. So at this point, we'll continue to take some stuff apart, work on the lower control arm on this. I think it's like a tie rod almost, or a sway link, but that's being changed out as well, along with the upper control arm. All right, next up is this in-link. It's a 15, and we'll go ahead and pull it out. I took a look at it from the knuckle side, and you can't really move it out from the knuckle side. You're gonna have to twist it out, or it's gonna have to be taken apart, one of the two. I'm gonna find out here in a minute. Well, that didn't do anything. Oh, I know why. I was going the wrong way, but we got it. Very good. All right, so it turns out that once you loosen the top, you can just pull it straight towards the driver's side of the car, and it just comes right out. So when we go to put the other one in, the replacement, we're going to look at these thread counts, and we're going to make sure that we duplicate that on the new part so that it is the correct length. This is one of the lower control arm bolts here, and it's not the same as many of the other bolts that we have pulled today. It has that smooth tip on it, which I think is to help guide if the camera will behave. Thank you. So keep this one separate because it is longer and it has that tip on it, and it does need to stay with the lower control arm. So before we drop the other control arm bolt, we need to drop the sway bar in link, sorry. And that is that little dude right there. And what actually needs to drop is over here. There's a bolt and a nut. I think that's probably a 12 or a 13, and we drop that out of the way, and what that'll let us do is when we do drop this final control arm bolt over here, when the control arm comes down, basically the in link's not going to try to hold it up. It'll just let it pass. So we're going to get that knocked out and bring it back. All right, so here's our setup. That's a 19mm bolt on the other control arm here, and this is the last thing holding in the control arm, so keep that in mind as you take this out. Once the bolt is clear, it's going to fall, and whether or not you are in the way is up to you. So we have that, and we took a jack, do a little bit of lifting there to take stress off the brake lines and emergency brake cable and all that good stuff. So this is going to fall, and it's going to make a nice kaplunk, and at that point the knuckle is going to be completely free, and we can start putting things back together. So, okay, so got the control arm bolt out. This is what I had to do. First things first, I had to take the nut off. That's an 18mm. Took it off with a wrench. Then I was able to mostly get the bolt, which is this crazy 19mm thing with this really funky custom washer on it.
There's another custom washer over here.
Yeah, and it's got this weird groove cut in it. It's a very strange bolt. Got most of that out of the way to the point where it was threaded again, and I could thread it out. You're gonna need a jack, kind of lift this up and down and wiggle it around so that you can get what you need to get the bolt out. So that's all done, and a word of caution, that's a spring, it's under compression. So as you are taking this last bolt out, you need to have this jack there to keep the compression. Otherwise, just as soon as it can, it's going to let go, and you're probably going to hurt yourself. I made sure that I was clear of the vehicle when we let the jack down, when this thing went spoing. And now that all that is done, we're going to get this the rest of the way out. There's some stuff you got to transfer out of the lower control arm before we get the new one installed, and then we'll use the jack to act as our spring compressor once everything is seated again, so we can try to get this guy lined back up, run a bolt through, and get it tight. And before we do all that, we do have replacement sway links, and we'll go ahead and switch those out as well. There we go. Alright, we started reassembly, and what we found out is this is a really interesting bolt. It has that washer welded to it and these guides on either side to force it to be in one position. And then I'll go ahead and I'll take this off so I can show you. Take this nut off. The washer on the other side is keyed. As you can see, it actually, that lines up with a cut that's in the bolt. So this is a very unique special bolt. Don't lose it. And you slide this on, and that locks the bolt from turning at all, which is the reason why the nut had to come out first before the bolt could even be backed out. So that's why that was that way. And what we're going to do is just put this back on, but leave it loose, so that way we can get the spring loaded back in and start bringing it back under compression, get it to line up with the knuckle, and go ahead and get a bolt through there. And we're going to make sure that the preload, or kind of the neutral position, is set. Then we tighten up both ends and we continue with rebuilding everything. Alright folks, here's the setup. We have loosely put this suspension link back in. The link itself is not even locked up tight yet. So the length is already, we did preset the length, we just didn't finalize it so we could wiggle and jiggle everything in. And to get this spring to compress again so we can get this lower control arm in place, I've hinged the bolt on the knuckle side, because that lets us have a much more gentle angle into getting the spring on and then compressed again. To get the spring to compress, we're going to take our jack here and we're going to move it to the bottom of the lower control arm and slowly lift it up. And meanwhile, somebody, probably me, is going to have to guide the end-link, sway end-link, through the hole in the control arm and get everything seated and start running some bolts through. So that is the plan. We put this end-link in to keep the knuckle from flopping around, or the stabilizer link. Wow, suspension link. And that's what we're going to do. So it's going to need all hands on this. I'll bring you back as we have updates. Okay, so one other thing to keep in mind, there are two vibration things. There's a hat that goes on the top, and then it's already over here in the lower control arm, but there is a plastic insert for the bottom, and the spring does have a top and a bottom. The top is broader, the bottom, the coil gets smaller. Make sure you have that right, because if you try to spring the sprung in backwards, you're in for a bad day. Just wanted to point that out. Alright guys, here's the update. So to get this back on, this is what you have to do. You disconnect this, so we were wrong about that. You want to leave this disconnected. And then you're going to lift off the bottom of the control arm. And the easiest thing to do first is to get the sway link threaded, and then after that you're going to reposition, and you may have, we wound up having to kind of stick it over here. You're going to lift until this bolt will start to wiggle, and you get it lined up enough to start moving it through, and then you're going to have to fiddle fart with it some more until you get it to the point where you can tap it through, and then you're going to have to rotate the bolt so that that cat head shaped washer will slide on. And after you do that, get your nut on, but don't make it tight, because we do have to set preload. All in all, it's very fiddly and kind of a pain, but not particularly hard. So that is the secret for the lower control arms. After that, the next step is we're going to take the shocks, or the shock that we set aside a while ago, and we're going to go ahead and mount that back up with the 3 bolts that go in that bracket. So remember, our shock is over there on the bracket, and that'll be our next target of opportunity. The mount is put back in for the shock. My suggestion to you is, leave this knuckle loose. You're gonna have to wiggle it and fiddle it. You're gonna have to wiggle and fiddle where you have the end of the shock sitting. Get them lined up, and then I use the same tools as I did to get it out. Use an extension, a swivel, and my impact driver. Got all that in, and next step's going to be putting this back in. Okay, so we're putting in our new upper control arm, and as we mentioned earlier, we got to set preload. So we set preload by measuring against the top of the fender here, about where that push pin is, and we said it would be 15. A little bit up. Somewhere in there. Yeah, I think I measured from right there.
And down.
Yeah, about right there. Alright, so we set it, and we'll finish tightening it up right there, and we'll move forward. Alright, so update. What we got this in without altering the geometry, and what we had to do is we lifted from the perch that this stabilizer link or suspension link goes in, and we had to lift up until we got it, and it is snug but not tight. And the next thing, reversing our removal order here, is we need to get the upper control arm back in, and then the very last bolt is going to be the lower shock. And once all is said and done, we're going to get things tight. So some things may have to get tight earlier than others, depending on how everything kind of goes back together, because we won't have access. For example, we had to get the shock out of the way so we could get better access to the upper control arm. So the upper control arm is going to need to be tightened up fully before actually we go any further. Good morning, everyone. It is the next day. Where we left off is that we had gotten everything together, and since we were at the preload measurement, we went ahead and tightened everything, because the idea is that you tighten at preload, because that's where everything should kind of naturally rest when you have the tire on and you're not on jacks or anything. So it reduces the wear on the bushings so they don't fail prematurely. That's the whole point of that. That's where we are. The only thing we still need to do, the thing that made us cry uncle yesterday, is we're working on threading this bolt through the bottom of the shock, and we're halfway there. The bolt's halfway through, but on the left side there, we don't quite have it lined up, and we were pondering how to make that happen with everything else connected. So that's where we are, and we're going to ponder on that, and I will bring you back when we come up with a solution. Alright guys, we got it. As you can see, captive nuts in there as well. And the solution was we had to take the upper control arm bolt loose again, and once we had that, we had the wiggle we needed. I tapped it in with my 4-pound hammer Thor, and then we had to lift up a little bit more. We got this back in, got it tight, and the very last thing we got to do is, remember, we had left this loose for adjustment. So in our replacement part, this is a 21 millimeter. Get that tight. And then you got this one here, and that's also a 21. And just going to tighten it up like so. Flip that over. There we go. All right, and that should pretty much be it. So we're going to let the jack down. And that's where she sits. Now the very last thing we got to do is, because we lifted off the brake disc a couple of times, you're going to inspect your brake rotor for damage. And it looks like it's okay. Which, when you lift correctly, not a big deal. It's a big hunk of iron, so not a problem. But the very, very, very last thing you got to do is check your dust disc, because they can get squished together. And then it will make contact, and you'll get this really awesome shing-a-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling-ling when you go down the road. It's awesome. Let me tell you, because I just had to fix it up front. It's a kind of a leftover from the powertrain swap project, and it looks like we actually bent that out a little bit. So as you can see, we got plenty of real estate through here. Camera will behave. Yep, and we're good. So now we put the tire back on, and that's going to be a 19 millimeter on the lug nut, and we'll use the impact driver just to knock it up tight, and that should do it. I will, when I edit this video, it'll clean it up so it's a little bit less chaotic, but I specifically do it this way where you discover as I discover, so you can see this isn't staged, it's not rehearsed. I'm learning, you're learning, we figure it out together. Alright guys, that will do it for this rear suspension swap on my 2010 Ford Fusion Jadzia. Please like, share, and subscribe. Leave me a comment, good or constructive. And remember, I make mistakes so you don't have to. I'll see you guys next episode.